How is everyone doing out there? It is myself, Jeff Black. I'm joined by my good friend Brandon DeCruz. We are Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast. This week is episode 66. So we're going to unravel the truth about restaurant meals and menu errors and how to eat out and stay on track during a fat loss phase. It's a lot harder than you would think. A very interesting point, Brandon. I'll be interested to hear the conversation about the restaurant meals because we had Ben Azadia or Zeta on Hero Keto Flex. We had him on the Excellence Cartel. He was he's like our last guest ever. Um, and he had said he interviewed Kobe Bryant's nutritionist doctor, and she was basically like, smoking would be better for you than eating out because of the vegetable oils.
Damn,
Is what
that's
she thought.
that's an
Yeah, no,
aggressive statement to say the
aggressive
least.
statement, but it was interesting. But anyway, so we're gonna get into that. But first, let's go over the last 7 days. B, what's been going on in your world, bro?
Man, I'm gonna keep this one short because I've had a long week to say the least, my man. It's funny. We were going back and forth about, and I'm gonna let you open up about this when you do your update. But there was a fundraiser that you are partaking in, and you had sent me some info for, and I'm trying to go through it and find the links and stuff. And I was telling you, dude, I'm not messing with this technology. And the reason for that was my iPhone went down last week. And then my Aura ring crapped out on me as well. So like I have no data tracking the last week, and I'm someone that I really do like paying attention to my metrics and stuff. So I've been ordering things left and right. Finally, I got a new phone in. I'm still waiting to hear back from Aura about my ring and all that kind of stuff. But other than that, man, everything's been good. Just super busy on my end. Very deep into this course. I will be taking the finals for my accreditation through from September into October. So this is pretty much my last semester for that course, and then I'm also um, in graduate level studies at University of Colorado. So I'm taking some independent studies there. And so I've just been slammed with school, and then as well as obviously with clients, that's my main priority. But I do always try to stay active in my continuing education because I really do want to continue advancing both my knowledge and my ability to apply that knowledge. So other than that, man, everything's good. And I'm looking forward to hearing about your week.
Well, my week has been super good. Purchased a new car. I traded in the Lexus and got myself my partner and I got a SUV that we are just splitting the
Congrats.
payment on. So yeah, my car was paid off, so it made the car payment. It's a Genesis GV80, so it'll be nice to have that driving to Pittsburgh next week.
Oh, yeah.
The fundraiser, man. I did that in response to I had found out the night before I lost $18,000. My book, the company that's doing my book, went under. So I'm out all my money. So I have to go to switch to self-publishing. And I hired someone to work for me to basically help build my brand and help me do this because I don't know what the hell I'm doing at this point.
Absolutely. This is your first
So
book.
yeah. But otherwise, man, I bought some stuff for my Supra. I'm getting into that as a hobby. Kind of like there's a couple of Supra drivers here in Nashville. We were talking about meeting up and doing some rides together, just trying to kind of broaden my horizons and expand and just kind of get out there a little bit. I think I've been guilty lately of feeling guilty if I'm at home and not doing shit. And then I'm like, nah, man, like there was a lot of years I was in that gym 16-hour days, like doing like 5 minute, $5 sessions for 30 minutes, crazy shit, whatever it was,
Absolutely. We
just to
all
be able
start
to,
somewhere. And a lot of
yeah.
people, they look at where we are now and don't realize the shit that we ate and we took and the things that we did. And I'm still working 12 to 14-hour days. And I know that you did that. And, I managed two careers. And sometimes people from my corporate life will tell me, oh, it must be nice to work for yourself. And I'm like, I kind of take that and I just let it brush off my shoulders. But if they go again, I'm like, listen, I work more hours than you ever have, first and foremost. And second of all, I left a career that had incredible security because I went after something I loved. And I'm completely supportive of you staying within the sports nutrition industry. However, I have a lot of those, former associates and friends that are kind of critical of me. Like, how could you, like, dude, you were in some of the best companies, you had one of the highest positions, and like all these things. And they only see like the positives of which I left and don't realize, like, dude, I went out on my own. I took a huge leap. I took a leap of faith essentially into something that I truly love. And yes, I was incredibly successful in the sports nutrition industry, and I'm incredibly thankful for the connections I made, the career I cemented, the reputation that I have within that industry. But I fell out of love with it, and I want to do something that I'm truly passionate about. And I'm able to wake up, like I told you, this morning I'm up at 2 a.m. I'm already, I was already answering emails and stuff, and that's mostly due to a lack of sleep. But generally, I'm up at 3 a.m. because I want to communicate with my clients around the country, around the world, and that is something that I honestly, from the bottom of my heart, could not say about my sports nutrition job. I did have many times that I had international clients or accounts that I worked with, and I'd have to wake up and get on a sales call for 5 a.m. And I wasn't nearly as excited as I am for this. So, people are always going to judge, and you have to kind of like let that go and, just brush off your shoulders and keep it moving.
Yeah, I don't give a fuck what people think. I never have. And that's probably part of the reason why some people don't like me. And it's cool. I'm fine. I don't like them either. But nonetheless, man, that's really kind of about it. I work 14-hour days, or no, it's 13 hours is what I do now. I do 5 a.m. to 6. And that's only Monday through Thursday. And then Friday, I pull the pin about 3 o'clock in the afternoon now. But I'm up at 5. So, like I tell everybody, it just changes a little bit. Like you just kind of, as you get more comfortable, put more time in, is what I encourage all entrepreneurs to do, on all honesty. But let's get into this, man. So we're going to talk about unraveling the truth about restaurant meals and menu errors. Like I've eaten out with Brandon, and I think the waiters get more confused about what to actually cook, right? And then because there's so much removals and changes, I was laughing. But it's true though. I mean, there's so much
Hey,
errors that
there
go
are certain
on.
Yeah, there are certain things that if you have a goal, and I'm not going to make all the suggestions that I do personally. I have made a system essentially, and I have like an ordering framework that I work off of, which I'll expand on later. However, there's times, and there's been many times that I've traveled and seen you. And the thing is, I'm deep into a fat loss phase. I have a photo shoot coming up, and come hell or high water, I'm getting to my goal. And I'm not going to let a restaurant dictate what I eat. If I'm paying for something, I'm completely cordial, polite, and very gracious when asking for these things. But there's certain things that I just ask, can we make some adjustments? Can I get in, and sometimes I'll construct my own meal, and I never have a problem or a hesitation paying for it, tipping the waiter extra, whatever it may be. I never hesitate at that. I just want to make sure that, dude, if I'm choosing to go out to a restaurant and I'm choosing to eat and pay for a meal, especially in today's, society where and culture where restaurant meals are so much more expensive than I would eat at home. Like if I'm paying for something, I want to get what I want. Just like if someone else went out and they had no, you know, desire to improve their fitness or no cause of concern for their health or their physique or whatever it may be, they order something delicious and they want it come out the exact way that they wanted it.
Mhm. I agree. We're going to get into how eating out and staying on track during a fat loss phase, though, like how you can actually pull that off. So, with that being said, we picked 6 topics that we are going to dive into. And the first one is, let's get into eating out at restaurants and how it leads to many not achieving the body composition they desire. I think if you eat out more than one meal a week when you're in a fat loss phase, it's negative. My 2 cents. And I think that even is, if you try to eat as clean as you can and certain things like that. I just think, by what I have seen, most people don't judge that very well, and you tend to get calorically pretty deep pretty quick. So what say you, Mr. B, and what does the research say?
All right. So just, as an introduction to this topic, the real reason I wanted to cover the topic of eating out at restaurants during a diet and how it can negatively impact our progress during a fat loss phase and our body composition as a whole is essentially threefold. First of all, it's summer. And I have a ton of clients that are in fat loss phases. So the concept of eating out and still making progress is something I'm helping them navigate on a weekly basis. And both you and I have been dieting, have been in dieting phases for the majority of the summer. So this is something that we've had to work around or avoid or whatever it may be to be able to get to our goal. Second, over the past 10 years, I've learned a lot through trial and error, both with coaching myself and then coaching countless others. And I've seen that there are several bottlenecks that hold many back from seeing the results that they want, especially from a fat loss perspective. And we've covered many of these bottlenecks on specific episodes of the show. So it's not just to do with restaurant meals, but we've covered things like a lack of stress management skills, poor sleep quality, inaccurate calorie tracking, and then also, my favorite, which is eating back calories on, based on what someone sees on like their Whoop band or their Apple Watch. And that's just a whole, we've went into that multiple times, how inaccurately those things track things. And they cause you to think that you've burned far more calories than you have, and then you're eating in excess, essentially. But one aspect of dieting we haven't covered in detail is the topic of how eating out at restaurants too frequently can impact both our fat loss and body composition progress. Now, third, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this when I say that I see a ton of fitness influencers on social media promoting the idea that you can essentially eat whatever you want and get shredded. And they try to reinforce their argument by taking, like, you'll see it all the time, like these posts. They'll take shirtless photos or selfies of themselves flexing in front of like a double burger and fries from Five Guys. And there's literally countless amounts of these individuals on social media who show off how they can supposedly eat all these tasty, hyperpalatable, calorie packed meals and stay shredded. But this isn't an adequate representation of what most of us will need to do to get lean and can do to stay lean, especially because if we really think about it, like many of the clients that you and I work with, or many of the listeners of the show, they're in the real world and they're not sponsored athletes. They can't spend, 4+ hours a day in the gym training. And they also aren't loaded to the gills on drugs and fat loss agents. So what this, hypothetical, influencer says they can do and get away with isn't what they can really get away with in reality. And what many don't realize, when they see these posts is that this is a marketing tactic these influencers use to try to get people to think that they can eat all these cheat foods regularly and are able to get lean doing so and can help you do the same essentially. So, but in reality, this is honestly all bullshit and it's false advertising being done to drive like viral IG posts and sell their shitty ebooks. And you'll see that they'll have like cookbooks that they sell on like how to eat fast food and stuff. And it's like, dude, you don't even eat that stuff. And I'll tell you from personal experience, dude, I worked in the sports nutrition industry for 14 years, and many of the companies that I worked with had these same social media stars that I see now posting these type of posts on Instagram and on social media and on Facebook and all these things. And they were our sponsored athletes. And I can tell you firsthand that I've literally been out to dinner with some of these types of individuals, and they've taken a photo in front of something like a burger and fries and a piece of cheesecake. And then they've literally, have given it away to someone else at the table once they did that like impromptu photo shoot. And that's because they really don't eat these things except on a rare occasion when they're not getting ready for something. And the issue with social media, and this can be said about like broadly about social media, but especially in the context of fitness and nutrition and what people promote they do and what they actually do, is that people only show you what they want you to see. And a lot of people are looking for what they want to hear, not the information they need to hear, and what they should do to be successful within their health and fitness journeys. So it's easy to fall for these myths and get sold like these pipe dreams, essentially. So seeing as the fallacy of being able to eat out all the time and get lean is so prevalent, I wanted us to do a full podcast on what to look out for when eating out, as really my goal with this podcast, and this is something that you and I came together, well over a year ago, was to empower people through education and provide others with informed consent and an increased level of awareness. As I believe as a coach, we should be aiming to help clients become healthier and transform themselves into the best version of themselves, while also helping to limit them from making these same mistakes they've made in the past, which have hindered them from making the progress that they desire. And I also think it's really important to cover topics which will help clients identify when they're being their own worst enemy and becoming the roadblock and anchor in their ability to reach their goals. And this is something I often speak directly with clients about. So, there's a bunch of issues that, I'm always trying to look like, what are the bottleneck? What is the anchor holding this person back? And for many, that's helping them develop better habits around nutrition, training, and movement, and improving things like their diet quality, their relationship with food, as well as their approach to training. For some, that's helping them to lose fat and keep it off, which is something they've never been able to do in the past, despite trying time and time again. For others, that's actually getting them to do the opposite. And it's actually getting them to eat more because they've been under eating and under fueling themselves for so long that it's having negative impacts on their hormones, their body composition, and their quality of life. And then for some, that's helping them moderate eating out and helping them to eat in a more strategic manner so that they're not working hard all week to create a deficit, only to wipe out a large portion of that deficit during a meal out or completely erase it due to a lack of awareness around what's really in the foods that they're ordering from these dining venues. So on today's show, we're going to cover a multitude of topics related to the concept of both restaurants as well as eating out in a fat loss phase in and of itself. So we're going to look at things like the link between eating out more often and fat gain, the reasons, that why eating out too often can stall fat loss, why we tend to eat more calories, both in research and in practice, when eating out at restaurants. We're going to go over the research on the inaccuracy of restaurant menus, which I think will shock many of you, as it's literally wild how off these menus are. And these are things I've done, Instagram posts on it, and the response that I've gotten from my audience is crazy. We're going to go over whether or not you should track when eating out. And then also we're going to, essentially cover the concept or really give you guys insight and tips and advice on how to, stay on point when eating out during a diet. So Jeff, you ready to get into this one, my man?
Let's get into it, man. So what is the link between increased frequency of eating out, higher calorie intake, and weight gain? I think that the general population shows us that's true.
Yeah, well, just like in one of our previous podcasts 2 episodes ago, we covered I don't want to say the debate, but the difference between processed foods and unprocessed foods, and essentially how much of the American diet or the average diet around the world, honestly, is predominantly made up of processed foods and the ramifications both on our weight, on our body composition, and on our health and what that can have. So this is kind of just like a little bit of an offshoot because a lot of restaurants are presenting us with processed hyperpalatable foods. So the research data we have regarding eating out finds an association between eating out at restaurants, body fat, and BMI, where those who eat out more often tend to have a higher body fat percentage and increased BMI, which could be due to a multitude of reasons. And so a study of restaurant food and body fatness showed that the frequency of consumption of restaurant food was positively associated with body fatness, independent of a person's alcohol intake and their physical activity levels. And they also found that variety within food groups was shown to be an important predictor of body fatness, and the direction of the association depended on which food groups provided the variety in the diet, where they found that the amount of sweets, snacks, condiments, and entrees consumed was positively associated with higher body fat levels, whereas the variety of vegetables in the diet was associated with lower body fat levels. And this is because restaurant meals tend to be high in fat and low in fiber, and thus they're calorie dense. They're much more calorie dense than anything we would prepare, most of us would prepare at home. And restaurants also typically serve a variety of hyperpalatable foods in large portions, which are far larger and higher in calories per meal than we'd make for ourselves. Like, think about when you meal prep, you're not making like these super, tasty combinations of all these different ingredients and throwing butter and oil like out the wazoo on these meals. And so within this study in particular, the researcher team suggested that the increasing variety of high calorie foods available and the increasing proportion of household income spent on foods consumed away from the home may help to explain the current US national rising rates of obesity. And so, then in conjunction with this, a 2018 study looked at the associations between frequency of eating out at both sit down and fast food restaurants and BMI, and found that for every 1 meal per week increase in fast food and sit down restaurant consumptions, it was associated with an increase in BMI of 0.6 to 0.8 BMI points. And they also found that the individuals who described their diet as healthy, who avoided high fat foods and believed their diet was keeping their weight controlled and well balanced, did not visit restaurants frequently. A 2016 cross-sectional study found that the more that individuals consume meals not prepared at home, the higher the link they had to having higher body fat levels and higher body mass index. And they found that BMI scaled linearly with frequency of food consumption outside the home, where those who ate out 5 times a week had a much higher body mass index than those who ate out 2 to 4 times per week. And those who ate out 2 to 4 times per week also had higher BMI levels than those who ate out 0 to 1 times a week. So essentially, we're seeing that the more you eat out, the higher the likelihood that you're going to have a higher body mass index and also a higher body weight and body fat percentage. And as we covered in last week's episode, our diet quality and the subsequent calorie intake are heavily influenced by our food choice selection. But they're also drastically impacted by where we choose to consume our meals from and whether we prepare those meals for ourselves or not. So a 2016 study looked at the impact of fast food and full-service restaurant consumption on daily calorie and nutrient intake in U.S. adults. And this study looked at the eating habits of over 18,000 U.S. adults and found that fast food and full-service restaurant consumption were associated with a net increase in people's daily total calorie intake of about 190 extra calories per day. So think about that across the course of a week time period. That's almost 2,400 calories extra that someone's adding to their daily or their weekly calorie intake, and that's 2/3 of a pound gained each and every week. Then a 2014 study on the impact of restaurant food consumption on the calorie and nutrient intakes of adults in the US found that adults' fast food and full service restaurant consumption was associated with higher daily calorie intake and poorer dietary indicators, where fast food consumption was associated with a 194 calorie per day increase in a person's daily calorie intake, and full service restaurant consumption was associated with a 205 calorie per day increase, with both leading to higher intakes of saturated fats. And we also see that in the last few decades, the amount of foods and percentage of calories, calorie intake eaten outside the home and from restaurants has more than doubled as eating out has become far easier and more convenient to do, especially due to the fact that every day a new restaurant or a new food joint or a fast food eatery, opens up. And we also live in a society, like if we really think about it, we live in a society where we can literally order any delicious calorie-packed food item that we want, all from the convenience of our home and literally from our fingertips, essentially, due to the advent of things like Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, and these other delivery services. So nowadays, we aren't even like expending calories to get these, these foods. We aren't going through the process of, getting ready or getting in our car or walking to a place. Really, what we're doing is we're kicking back on the couch and we're ordering something from our phone and literally having it hand delivered to us with literally no calories expended or hassle whatsoever. So it makes it so not only is our energy expenditure lower, and we see that within US demographics that we're taking less steps than ever. The average American is taking 5,100 steps or less per day, which is, measly and extremely sedentary, and it has so many downstream impacts on health, body composition, and body fatness. But also, we're consuming far more calories per day, especially from meals prepared outside the home. So this is like this situation that's like a recipe for disaster. It all just compounds on itself, especially when people are reliant on eating meals that are either prepared from restaurants or fast food joints, or they're really reliant on getting delivery services or takeout or takeaway or whatever you want to call it. And so really what it comes down to, it's having a drastic impact on not only our health and our body composition, but also those who get into these bad habits of relying on these things. And then they want to go into a fat loss phase and they wonder why they don't see the progress that they're looking for.
I believe that's 100% true. So then I guess, what are some of the many reasons eating out too often can stall fat loss? Like I said, I think above one, you start getting dicey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you see that in the literature that those who eat out at restaurants 0 to 1 times per week have a lower BMI than those who eat out 2 to 4 times per week, and as well as those who eat out 5+ times a week. And so really when we look at it, there are many reasons as to how and why eating out at restaurants can stall fat loss, many of which center around the fact that restaurant meals are engineered to make us eat more calories, which is why many of these places offer calorie-packed meals filled with combinations of starch, fat, sugar, and salt, which make it hard to put the fork down and push the plate away. And the issue with restaurant meals is they're prepared to be hyperpalatable, pleasurable, and enjoyable, and to have us eat more in the moment, but they also leave us wanting to come back for more. So it's not like just like, first of all, they're not satiating, but they also lead us to have cravings for those same type of foods later, and to want to, re-engage with them. And essentially, a lot of times when you really look at it, like I've had this conversation with many clients over the years where it's like, what are your habits around food? And when I get their first intake, it's like, it's almost like they always go to the same restaurants. It's because they've gotten used to certain, delicious tasting meals, and it just keeps them coming back again and again. And I find that those are the same meals that a lot of these individuals crave, like during a diet. And so, there's many issues around this, but meals prepared at restaurants also have far more calories than our meals prepared at home. And then we even realize or account for, especially as menus are often off by at least 30 to 50%. And some research shows that they can be off by as much as 245%. So we get a lot more calories than we expect or even realize when eating out at restaurants. And this drastic increase in calories consumed when eating out is due to a multitude of reasons. So the portion sizes are larger and the meals are more calorie packed than the same meals that we make at home. And research finds that 92% of individuals clean their plate, meaning they eat whatever they're served. So it's not like we even eat a smaller amount of these, larger meals. So we have literally no control over portion sizes or preparation, which often leads us to consuming more calories than we think. And then we need to stay in a calorie deficit and continue seeing fat loss progress. Also, restaurant meals tend to use a ton of added fat sources like oils and butters, which we can't see, but these fat calories add up real quick. And this isn't to say that like fat is inherently, bad, but fat sources do have more than double the calorie content of protein and carbs at 9 calories per gram as compared to 4 calories per gram. So they're really easy to sneak in and not even account for. And they make foods far tastier and more hyperpalatable, which drives us to consume even more calories, which makes it so that we eat more than we want to without even realizing it, especially as fat is the least satiating macronutrient. So it's not like the hundreds of calories that we're getting from things like butter or oils or cream-based sauces and salad dressings leave us any fuller than we would if we didn't include those in those meals. And how many fats are included in meals and hidden calories are in restaurant meals is something that many don't even realize. And honestly, this was something I didn't realize either. And you know how I got, aware to this was I actually had a client that I worked with a few years ago that was a chef in an Italian restaurant. And he came to me looking to lose weight and improve his body composition. And this was literally like an eye-opening situation and opportunity for me. And I'm super fortunate and happy that I had this opportunity. I really got to know this individual. I worked closely with him. And I really got a big insight into the food industry and how meals are prepared as a result of our communication. And whenever I get a new client, I go through this process and I always go over like their previous fat loss phases and what has and hasn't worked for them in the past, as well as what they think were some of the biggest factors that held them back. And in this case, with this particular client who was a chef, he said that it was undoubtedly eating meals from the restaurant he worked at. And so after digging a bit deeper as to what he was eating and how it was prepared, it turns out that he was eating foods that he thought was healthy, like quote unquote healthy during his diet. And we see this often, like people are like, I eat super healthy, but they're not accounting for so many of the additives that may be in them. So he was eating things like honestly, that we would, usually, recommend during a diet. He was eating lean proteins. He was eating things like chicken breast and lean cuts of beef and fish. He had brown rice, and he was very into like low glycemic carbs. So he was always like, I eat quinoa, I eat brown rice, I eat, sweet potato. He had salads, he had veggies like broccoli. But his weight loss had stalled just a little over to a month into his past diet. And it ended up being due to two things. So, first of all, he wasn't accounting for portion sizes. He was just eating the standard size meal that they'd serve at the restaurant. And he also opened up that, about the fact that they use a ton of oils and butters and additives to their foods. And seeing as he worked in the restaurant and spent the majority of his day there, I told him to continue eating there, but to simply prepare each meal himself and to not use the regular amount of oil and butter they usually cook with, and to get the dressings and cream sauces on the side. And I also told him, this is something that I do myself, is, I particularly like, keep in mind, he worked at this restaurant. He was bringing things with him. So I said, listen, in your bag where you bring your other stuff for the day, you like change of clothes and things of that sort. I said, listen, if you want condiments to use during your meals that you're there, just bring low calorie condiments like G Hughes or mustard or, Frank's Red Hot. And, or in the other case, I said, if you forget that, simply, get the sauces on the side. Say you have a salad, get the dressing on the side, and then simply dip your fork into the dressings and then eat the salad rather than pouring the whole thing on there. And I also had him, eat all of his veggies steamed. And he, honestly, he started dropping body fat quickly just due to this. Like, I didn't change his actual portions, none of that. All I did was change his preparation and his approach to these meals. And then I also told him that if something melts in his mouth, it's most likely smothered with butter. So, for instance, there was times during this fat loss phase where he was unable to cook the meal for himself, or he had another chef, and he had told them, "Listen, I'm trying to reduce, my calorie intake. I'm trying to diet." But it was kind of just like par for the course, where they would just inadvertently, cook things in the way that they were used to cooking it. So I told him, "Listen, if you see and you're able to compare, like the meals that you prepare in your restaurant, usually use a little bit of oil, a little bit of butter, and in comparison, this chicken breast is melting in your mouth. All I want you to do is overestimate the calories in that meal by 20% when tracking your intake." And I worked with this client a few years ago, but I believe he lost something like 8 or 9 pounds within the first month of the diet, which shows just how many calories, extra calories he was taking in by eating restaurant meals on a frequent basis. So this was like
Yeah.
a really like in the trenches experience, which opened my eyes. Like, 8 or 9 pounds. That's, say that he was losing 2 pounds per week. That is a 1,500 calorie deficit per day. And that was literally not due to me modifying any of his actual, meals, except for what they were cooked in. So, you could imagine these things rack up. Say you're eating 3 or 4 times, he was eating about 3 meals a day out to eat. That's an extra 500 calories per meal that we were just able to reduce just due to the fact that he wasn't accounting for the fact that there were so much added fats and oils and butter and cream sauces in the items that he was eating.
So then I know we have a point on here why we eat more calories when eating at restaurants. Is there anything else you want to cover, or do you want to go on to the research of the inaccuracy of restaurant menus? Because there's no way in hell you can walk into McDonald's and eat for less than 1,000 calories and have a good meal, is my opinion. But
No, absolutely. So, no, I'm going to go over why we eat more calories at restaurants, because there is interesting literature on this. And so,
I'm
you know,
intrigued by this. So I guess my thought is it just is a no-brainer. You're going to eat more at the restaurant because you're going to tell yourself to get the appetizer. I feel like it's easier to talk yourself into things when you're there.
absolutely. So it impacts not only our habits, our behaviors, our decisions around food, but also even if we were to get the same type of foods at a restaurant, they contain far greater amount of calories than we would at home. And then also we have to think about the fact that it's really hard for us to moderate our intakes when we're eating out due to the food environment, due to the smells, the aromas in the area. And so restaurants make it harder and harder for us to succeed in a diet based on the way they've changed their approach to the meals they offer, the calorie intakes contained in those meals, and the amount of hyperpalatable options they present us with, which all increase the likelihood of us eating more food and over consuming calories when we eat out a meal at a restaurant as compared to when we prep that same meal for ourselves. And so when we look at the data on restaurants, we see that a lot of what they've changed has made their meals both better tasting, but not necessarily better for us, especially from a calorie intake perspective. And so a 2019 study looked at the changes in calories, portion sizes, and meal options over a 30-year period from 1986 to 2016, and found that over those 3 decades, the portion sizes of entrees and desserts significantly increased, as did the amount of calories in each of these categories. And so desserts showed the largest increase in energy intake, where they increased 62 calories per decade. So over a 30-year span, the exact same dessert that you would have ordered from that restaurant in the 80s now contains an extra 186 calories when we order today. They also found that the number of entrees, side dishes, and desserts for all restaurants, options combined increased by 226%. So the portion sizes and calorie amounts aren't only higher, but the amount of high calorie items we have the opportunity to order has more than doubled. And so, besides the fact that meals prepared by and eaten at restaurants are calorie dense and often contain hidden calories such as liberal amounts of refined fats like oil, butter, and other additives like sugar that all make it harder for us to moderate and control our energy intake of. One of the other main reasons why we tend to eat so many calories over what we need to hit our goals when eating out is because of the massive portion sizes that restaurants provide us with. So when you go out to eat at a restaurant, there aren't individual, base portion size and meals. And this is something I often have a conversation with clients about, especially my females, because we have to realize the restaurants don't have a men's and women's menu or separate size entrees based on the calorie needs of the individual, which make it far, really increases our likelihood that we consume our calorie needs when eating out. Now, this impacts both sexes, but generally, this is what I've seen personally, and you'll see this in research as well. Due to the fact that there's differences in body weight and muscle that men carry as compared to women, guys can usually get away with eating more calories per day than females. Like we know that, we see that from a metabolic rate perspective, a total daily energy and expenditure perspective. And so a lot of times what I found is that many females tend to have their fat loss stalled even more often when they're going out to eat, as the portions they're served usually have so many calories in them that one meal can essentially contain a female's total calorie intake for the day, which can put them in a massive surplus for that day when we add in their other regular meals for that day. Because a lot of times when we're going out to eat, it's not like, you're saying like, all right, I'm going out to eat and I have 15, I'm eating 1,600 calories as my daily target to reach this fat loss goal. My maintenance is 2,100 and I'm eating in a deficit and I'm eating 1,600 calories per day. But a lot of restaurant meals, as we'll cover later, they're between like 1,200 and 1,600 calories on average. And so it's not like you're accounting for that and you're not eating any of your other meals per day. If you eat 4 meals per day, and generally they're 400 calories each, you're eating 1,200 calories. You're eating those other 3 meals, you're eating that 1,200 calories, and then you're adding on that 1,600 calories on top of that. So now you went from a daily target where you're eating 600 calories per day to now 2,800 calories per day, because unfortunately, there's no such thing as a small female with the goal of fat loss size platter. And most people eat a majority of what's on their plate. So when you're given a large plate, you're likely to eat more, even if that amount is way out of alignment with your personal calorie budget. And this is due to the fact that most of us are conditioned from childhood to clean our plates. Like, think about how many times when you were a kid that your parents would tell you, you need to clean your plate, you need to clean your plate. And often it was reinforced by the fact that you're not going to get dessert unless you clean your plate. So it's like, wait, when I think about this as a kid, as an adult now, I look back and I'm like, so I had to eat more calories of what was on my plate in terms of an entree to eat even more calories from dessert. Like that, it just, from a health and fitness perspective, that's definitely in left field as compared to, how I look at things now. But that's really the actuality of it. Like, we're conditioned in this manner where we're so used to eating what we're served. And the issue with these larger portion sizes is the more food we're served, the more calories we end up eating. And this is something we consistently see in the literature. So there was a study, and it's a famous study by Rolls and colleagues, and they had men and women come into the lab once per week for 4 weeks to eat lunch and provided them with 1 of 4 portion sizes. And in each week, they were given a different portion size of the exact same meal, which was a mac and cheese dish, which ranged between 500 and 1,000 gram servings. And each week, they were told to eat to fullness, yet they found that the bigger the portion they gave, the more those individuals ate. So when they compared how many calories were consumed during the smallest portion as compared to the largest portion, they ended up eating 30% more calories, despite saying they were full after the smallest portion condition. And so even though that they had reached the tide, they didn't even finish the 500 gram meal. It wasn't like they finished it and said they were still hungry. They reached fullness in that condition. But just the fact that they were presented with double the portion, they ate 30% more calories. And numerous studies have demonstrated that people's calorie intake increases when they are offered larger portion sizes.
Yeah.
So in one meta-analytic review, they found that doubling a food portion leads on average to an increase in energy consumption of 35%. Then in another Cochrane review, they found a consistent effect of portion size on energy intake. And they estimated that energy intake from food and non-alcoholic beverages attributed to differences in portion sizes was between 215 to 279 extra calories per day. Then another study found that we need, essentially what they were looking at was they wanted more real life situations to establish a true effect of portion size on calorie intake in daily life. And so they've also done, longer term studies in what is referred to as real life situations. And one of these studies was done by a research group led by French. And they demonstrated that exposure to a high calorie lunch over a period of 6 months led to significant increases in calorie intake and weight gain in a real life work setting, which is similar to what we'd see for those working in an office, where if you're around these hyperpalatable foods and you partake in those daily, festivities, essentially, someone brings donuts into the break room or Chinese, or you order out with your friends, what we see is that in the real world, you start to pack on pounds essentially from those habits. And we also tend to eat more when we eat out due to certain mechanisms involved in eating out. And these include things like unit bias mechanism, the visual cues mechanism, and awareness and estimation bias. So the unit bias mechanism suggests that we see one serving, such as one restaurant burger, as appropriate to consume at once, irrespective of its size or calorie intake. The visual cue mechanism refers to the fact that the portion size effect might be partially explained by visual cues, for example, the size of the plates we're served on. So many of us end up using visual cues to steer our portion size intake. So, for example, the degree of plate emptiness may activate meal termination. And so we see that, there's something called the Delbluth illusion, essentially. And this is frequently mentioned in the literature to explain how similar portion sizes of food appear larger served on a smaller plate than on a larger plate. And this steers individuals to judge portion sizes differently. So if we eat on larger plates, the likelihood of eating more is higher as compared to putting that same exact meal on a smaller plate or bowl. So this is something I'll sometimes suggest clients do when they're, in a fat loss phase. I'll say use smaller silverware, use, smaller bowls or plates to make it look like the illusion essentially of you having so much more food. Because think about it, if you're in a dieting phase and you're reducing your energy intake and you're utilizing the same huge plates, serving plates that you used to use, it's going to look like you have nothing there, and it's going to give you more of a feeling of that restriction. And then when it comes to the awareness and estimation bias, this explains the fact that we have difficulty in estimating amounts of food and are unaware of reference portion sizes, especially when we eat foods and items that we generally don't eat on a frequent basis. And just to sum this up, a 2005 review looked at the influence of food portion size and calorie density and its impact on calorie intake, and found that several well-controlled laboratory-based studies have shown that providing adults with larger food portions can lead to significant increases in calorie intake. And this effect has been demonstrated for snacks and a variety of single meals, as well as over the course of multiple days. And despite these increases in calorie intake, individuals presented with larger portions generally do not report or respond to increased levels of fullness, suggesting that hunger and satiety signals are often ignored and overridden when we're served larger portions, or we're we're essentially exposed to hyperpalatable foods, which is why we often eat more when we're out at restaurants. So overall, when we eat out more often, it increases our calorie intake and decreases our accuracy of tracking, and has been associated with higher body weight, body fat levels, and BMI due to how much, many more calories we eat as a result.
What does research show on the inaccuracy of restaurant menus? Because it depends. Like, right, like tzatziki is one of my favorite Mediterranean places, but when they cook the chicken, there's so much that goes into the way that they use the oil. Like, it could be off by hundreds of grams, just what I could think of just for fat alone. And I could imagine carbs with sugar and flour. So what does the research show about the inaccuracy? Is it really like mind blowing, or is it like less than 20% kind of reasonable?
No, we're talking mind blowing, my man. Unfortunately, I wish this wasn't the case, but this is something I've dug into quite deeply, because I have had situations where someone is tracking everything and they're not accounting for that. So anytime I go out to eat, I overestimate my calories in terms of the restaurant meal or what it says on the menu. And we do have a benefit nowadays because most times that we go out to a restaurant, we actually have the opportunity to see nutrition facts for the meals that they're listed on the menu. But the thing is that many people rely on these to be accurate and don't realize that, that they're not accurate. And so really, when we look at these menus, we have to use them and take them with a grain of salt. And we have to be objective and realize or be aware of the fact that just because a meal is listed as having, say, 800 calories on the menu, doesn't mean that when you order it, the meal that you're eating is actually going to be served with that exact amount of calories on your plate. So there's multiple studies that look at the amount of calories listed on restaurant menus and then test those meals and items and find that there's a massive discrepancy between how many calories a restaurant meal is listed to have in it and how many calories it actually has in it when it's served to one of us in a restaurant. And so in a 2010 study, it looked at the accuracy of stated calorie content of restaurant food items compared to what these foods actually contain calorie-wise when tested in the lab, and found that some individual restaurant items contained up to 200% of their stated calorie counts, meaning double the amount of calories. And when they included the free side dishes that you were able to order in conjunction, say like fries or a side of veggies or whatever it may be that comes included with your meals, they found that this discrepancy increased to an average of 245% over what was listed on their menu. So say that a meal contains 800 calories on the menu. This means that it can actually contain between 1,600 or over 1,900 calories on average. Then a 2011 study tested the accuracy of stated calorie contents of restaurant foods using a validated bomb calorimetry technique and looked at 42 sit-down and quick-serve restaurants and over 200 menu items and found that these foods contain an average measured calorie amount of 289 more calories per portion than they had listed on the actual restaurant's menus. Now, it's not only that restaurant menus or meals are labeled inaccurately, but they also contain far more calories than most of us would expect just based on what we ordered. So a 2013 study measured the calories in restaurant meals that didn't have their calorie information labeled and found that the average calorie intake of these meals was over 1,300 calories, which is equivalent to like 2/3 of the average person's typical daily calorie requirements. A 2016 study also looked at the calorie content of the most frequently ordered meals at US restaurants and found that the average meal at a non-chain restaurant contained over 1,200 calories, whereas popular cuisines like Italian and American restaurants had an average calorie amount of almost 1,500 calories per meal. And the study also looked at the average calorie content of side dishes we can order in addition to our entrees and found that these contained almost 400 calories on average. And so they also found that 92% of meals available at restaurants exceeded someone's typical energy requirements for a single eating occasion. So if you're someone dieting and your calorie target, say, is 2,000 calories per day, and you divide that over 4 meals, so essentially each of your meals contains around 500 calories. Most restaurant meals are going to contain about triple the amount of calories as a normal meal you'd consume at home had you not eaten out. And this is why it's so important to be aware of where you're eating and what you're ordering so that you're not stalling out your fat loss progress by eating out too frequently and feeling like you're nailing your diet, when in reality, most restaurant meals will put most of us, in a surplus for that day, or what they'll do is they'll negate part of the weekly deficit that you've created and thus slow down your weekly rate of fat loss.
So should you track when eating or when going out to eat, and how should you go about tracking? I'm going to give my little take. I tell clients, I'm like, look, man, Outback is in most of the apps. And if you eat a burger and fries somewhere, pick Outback. Just find something that's similar because you're never going to know the real number. Like we've discussed, like you're not going to know it, but at least you have a ballpark and then you could just kind of add more to it, knowing like, hey, that's probably a little under, but XYZ.
No, absolutely. I really think that the habit of tracking is really good for all of those in a fat loss phase. And I really do believe that for the vast majority of individuals who are dieting with the goal of improving their body composition by dropping body fat, they should be tracking their calories and macros when eating out at restaurants. And it's not about being perfect. So I really want to get this across the audience. Like, none of us can be perfect, myself included. However, just the act of tracking can help increase your awareness around what options you're choosing, what they contain in them, and help you make more informed nutritional decisions, which are more in line with your physique and health goals. And so when it comes to how to track when going out to eat, I generally suggest planning for the meal out ahead of time, which can set you up for success. So a simple thing I like to have clients do is to simply look up the menu in advance of going out and choose what they wish to order prior to going into the restaurant. Because what often happens, like when we wait until the last minute, aka when we arrive to the restaurant, is we tend to order more first and foremost because we're hungry at that time. So anytime you order when you're hungry, you're going to be more susceptible to ordering more. And then also we're going to be more likely to order what we crave or what looks good in the moment, which generally is going to blow out, our calorie and macro targets or budgets for that meal and even for that day. And even if you do try, like you really do try to hit your targets, you're going to be sitting there playing macro Tetris and trying to navigate the menu instead of spending quality time with your friends and family. And really, when it comes down to like when most people go out to eat, and this is something I often, I have this discussion with my clients, like the reason you're going out, it's not like you just want those foods, because if not, you would just go by yourself. However, a lot of times we go out because it's a part of our culture. It's a part of our, our bonding time with family. And so really you should be focusing on the quality of time that you have there instead of just having the focus be on the meal, And so really when it comes down to it, you should kind of take the decision fatigue out of that. And so, I'm big into, going over this concept of decision fatigue, and there is an element of decision fatigue which comes with trying to construct a meal that hits our targets when we're out with others. So I'm a big fan of taking the unnecessary decisions out of dieting. And we also see in research that just the act of thinking about food increases our drive to eat. So if we wait to think about what we want to eat when we enter the restaurant, we're going to be more likely to order more food than we would if we had made that decision prior to getting there. And this is because we tend to underestimate the effects hunger can have on our decision-making abilities around food. So when we go out and we decide what we're eating in that moment, when we're actually sitting at the restaurant, we're seeing all these like hyper plateable meals pass us by, or we're smelling all these delicious aromas in the meals around us, we're more likely to give into making decisions around food that we wouldn't make if we had made that decision beforehand, especially during a diet where hunger and appetite are higher. So just like I'd recommend, and I have this conversation often with clients, I'm like, listen, never go food shopping hungry, because you're going to buy things that aren't conducive with your goals. So just like I would recommend that, clients or others wouldn't, go shopping when they're hungry, I also suggest that you don't decide on what you're going to eat at a restaurant when you're hungry. And my best advice is to track and plan your day in advance. So say you plan out, you plan to go out for dinner on Saturday evening. So this show always comes out on a Friday. So say that, you're listening to this on your headphones right now, and tomorrow you're going to go out for dinner, either on today, which is Friday, either on Friday evening or Saturday morning. Log your earlier meals within that day. So for example, the day before I plan on going out to dinner, I'll tell you what I do personally on how I track these things. Whenever I'm planning to go out for dinner, the night before, I'll sit down, I'll plan the next day out essentially, and I'll log my regular, my first 3 meals that day. I generally eat 4 meals per day, so I'll log my first 3 meals, and then I'll pull up the menu for the restaurant I'm going to. And usually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for a leaner protein or a piece of meat like chicken breast or a lean cut of beef. And really, what I try to do is I try to go with an option that's better aligned with my goals. So I'll always look at the menus and I'll do a comparison. So I'll order, I'm always looking for simple swaps. So if there's fried chicken or there's grilled chicken, I'm going with grilled chicken. If there's, top sirloin or there's ribeye, I'm going for top sirloin. And so then I'll log the meal I plan on eating. And if MyFitnessPal doesn't have the restaurant or meal, you plan on getting, try breaking that meal down into its individual component parts. So in my case, I'd look up the cut of beef and the size of the potato and the sides I'm getting, and I'd put them in individually in MyFitnessPal. And I always ask them to cook it without butter or oil, which, Jeff can attest to because he's been out to eat with me many a times. But usually this just results in them using less butter or oil. So what I do is I overestimate to account for it, as the steak, potato, and veggies that I logged into MyFitnessPal aren't going to have butter or oil built into their calorie counts. Then I'll take whatever the meal came out to in terms of our total calorie intake, and we'll increase it by 20% to account for the margin of error in labeling to give me a buffer. And so say the meal I'm getting is, 1,000 calories in MyFitnessPal. When I add everything up, it comes to 1,000 calories. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase that by 20%. So I'm essentially going to take that and I'm going to go into the add food component of MyFitnessPal. And I'm going to add in another 200 calories from fat, given the fact that often restaurant meals have far more fat than a lot of things that you're going to log yourself that are whole foods essentially. And then I also try to hedge my bets on accuracy by asking for any, sauces or creams or condiments or dressings or glazes off or on the side, which you want to do to have more control over how much you use. Then once I've tracked everything that I plan to eat at the restaurant, I'll look at my totals. And usually what ends up happening is, and if you do this yourself, you're going to see this, is usually I'll notice that I've went over, my daily totals as a result of the meal out. So what I'll do is I'll see how far over I am. And so say, in this case, I am 50 grams of carbs and 20 grams of fat over for the day. I'll either modify my first 3 meals of that day to reduce my intake by 50 grams of carbs and 20 grams of fat to accommodate my meal out, or what I'll do is I'll usually split the difference. And so what I mean by that is I'm going to take 25 grams of carbs and 10 grams of fat out from the day I'm going out. So I reduce that energy intake. So say, it's 25 grams of carbs and 10 grams of fat. That's 100 calories from carbs and 90 calories from fat. So essentially 200 calories. I'm going to take that from my energy intake of that particular day. And then I'm going to do the same thing the day after to ensure that I hit my weekly calorie budget. And so that's really a great way in which I found that's really effective for me to track out. But also I've had countless clients that have utilized that same approach, and it's really helped them to manage their calorie budget essentially and look at it from a daily perspective, but also from a weekly perspective.
So then I guess we wrap up with advice on how to eat out and stay on track during a fat loss phase, correct?
Yes, sir. All right. So when it comes to the advice I found most helpful for both myself and then my clients when incorporating meals out during diet, it starts with keeping your meals out simple. So if you're going to order a meal out at a restaurant, stick to simple meal options that are comprised of less ingredients, as this is usually going to be more conducive for your goals and your calorie budget. And so less ingredients in a meal means less additives and variables to take into consideration and a much easier time gauging how to track that meal. And there are a lot of inherent errors in the calorie estimations on restaurant menus. So the best way to minimize the likelihood of your meal containing double the amount of calories is listed is to stick with simple options, such as, say, like a dry rub steak, sweet potato and a side salad. Then you should look to prioritize protein and fiber. So the goal of restaurants is to provide delicious foods which are easy to overeat and basically encourages you to overconsume calories. And this can be really easy to do, especially if you've been dieting, which is why I suggest starting out, any restaurant meal with a large plain salad to get some fiber in, while others around you are having appetizers. And this will greatly help with satiety. And then make sure that whatever you order for a meal has a large serving of protein. And a lot of times I end up asking for double protein, double meat or whatever it may be, because a lot of times these portion sizes are really small. So this is something that you might want to do, especially if you're somewhere and you're really trying to nail your diet as well as your protein intake for that day. Especially because protein intake is the most satiating macronutrient. So this will help with increasing fullness and lowering your likelihood of overeating on other items. And you want to be open with your friends and family about your body composition goals. And if you're going out to, eat with friends and family, don't hesitate to discuss with them in advance your current physique goals and what you're doing to reach these goals. And you want to set yourself up for success. And an easy way to do so is to provide some input when you guys are choosing a restaurant. So often what I'll recommend you guys do, and I do this myself, honestly, is that you want to try to give some input about where you're choosing to go to eat. And if you could pick a place where you'll be able to get something that could fit into your target goals, that's really easy way to set yourself up for success. And also, if you and your friends are in the process of looking for a place to eat, so this is a situation we often find ourselves in, where we're looking to see exactly, what restaurant do we want to go to, or where are we going to go out to eat for this dinner. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll be proactive and I'll pull up the menu in advance to see if there's anything that I can fit in. Another thing that I would advise is to avoid buffets and all-you-can-eat restaurants, because honestly, this is a recipe for disaster when dieting, and a situation you don't want to put yourself in, as you want to put yourself in an environment which is more conducive for your goals. And to be honest with you guys, most restaurants aren't going to be conducive for your goals. However, it is, if you avoid things like buffets and all-you-can-eat restaurants, it's going to, essentially hold you from, experiencing that buffet effect where you're just, eating, a gluttonous amount of stuff. And so I'd also advise that you skip appetizers while you're in a fat loss phase, because when you really think about it, like, a lot of people don't like look at the context of words, but they're called appetizers for a reason, as they're made to whet your appetite, not satiate you. So many times they just encourage you to eat and order more after. And I also like to use an ordering framework when eating out, which has really allowed me to stay on track during a diet when eating out, which is a situation I usually will find myself in way more, especially like when I was working on the road and I was working in the sports nutrition industry. I always found myself in these situations where I had to go out to dinner for corporate meetings or to meet the responsibilities of my job or my career. And so within that, I had to create like some type of framework or default diet to be able to navigate these things on a frequent basis, because I knew if not, they were going to hold me back from my goal. So the first thing I recommend is to have a water preload or a liquid preload when you get to the restaurant itself. And I'll usually do this myself by using what I call the 2-cup rule. And this was actually something that I got years ago from Alan Aragon, but I've kind of changed it slightly based on both the research and then also how many times I've utilized this with clients, and I've switched up his approach and made one of my own. And so I'll usually do this where I'll ask for a cup of water with lemon, and then I'll also get a Diet Coke or whatever diet beverage is your favorite, both of which have 0 calories. And this can help improve hydration, which is often, a lot of times people don't realize that they are dehydrated, yet they're mistaking that for hunger. So you want to make sure that you're not dehydrated going into one of these meals, but it's also going to help to manage hunger and appetite. It's going to decrease calorie intake, and it's going to create and sustain a deficit easier. And so the use of liquid preloading strategies prior to meals helps increase feelings of fullness and better manage appetite. So most of the water preloading studies that we have look at the effects of drinking 2 cups or 16 ounces of water 30 minutes prior to a meal, and finds that subjects report higher levels of fullness and lower levels of hunger when compared to not having the water preload prior to that meal. Research also finds that the water preload usually leads people to consuming about 10% less calories as well. And so this increase in fullness and decrease in calorie intake also seems to compound over time. And in trials where water preloads have been used prior to each of the main meals of the day, they've seen better weight loss outcomes. So this is an easy, a super easy way to feel fuller within a meal, and also to better moderate your calorie intake when eating out. Now, the next part of the framework is to order simple meals with as many single ingredient items as possible. So whenever I eat at a restaurant, I look for meals that have simple whole food components, which are going to be far more satiating than if I get a mixed dish filled with all of these sauces and flavors. And I always, try to look for a lean protein source like grilled chicken breast or lean meat like sirloin steak or filet, as these are high protein foods that will help me not only hit my protein target, but it's going to keep me satiated. And they're also lower in fat, essentially lower fat alternatives to other protein containing items on the menu, like your chicken thighs or your chicken fingers or your wings, your burgers, or your fatty cuts of steak. So it's an easy way to like shave off calories and stay within your calorie budget for the day. The next component of the meal are veggies. So for the veggie portion of my meal, I'll usually go with a plain side salad or a garden salad. And I do that because salads are a high volume, low calorie source of veggies, which are going to be one of the few veggie options at a restaurant where we can get a lot of bang for our buck in terms of the amount we get and the low amount of calories it provides. And it's also one of the few veggie sources that you can literally guarantee will come out with any oil or butter added to it, as literally every single restaurant that you go to is going to have some plain fresh lettuce. Next, I aim to reduce and minimize added empty calories from liquid sources. So when I'm ordering my meal, I'll always ask them what the meal is cooked in and what generally happens. When I usually ask this, it generally happens to be either oil or butter. Sometimes they have some other additives, but in most restaurants it's going to be oil and butter. And so what I'll do is I'll just simply ask them to not cook my meal in any butter or oil. And I do this so that I'm not taking in a bunch of empty calories that aren't going to add to my satiety at all, and also so it's easier for me to track my macros and calories for that meal, as it's harder to estimate how many added fats were used when a meal has fats added to it, or it's cooked in oil, or it's cooked in butter. And also, if the meal I ordered has any sauces to go with it, I'll ask that they put them on the side so that they're not already included into my entree, because it's super common that we'll get hundreds and hundreds of calories added without even realizing it from the cream sauce or from the dressing that they pour on, because they literally pour these things on to make them super tasty and hyper palatable, and they're not concerned about the calorie counts or you sticking to your diet or hitting your calorie targets for the day. So they're just trying to make these things as good tasting as possible, but that's not going to be conducive to your goals, especially because when it comes down to it, these sauces, these condiments, these dressings aren't going to lead to increased satiety. They're only going to lead to increased calorie intake. And I will always ask for things like hot sauce for my proteins, as that's going to be the lowest calorie condiment available. And then I'll also ask for yellow mustard on the side, which has a very low amount of calories in it. And then this is my mustard trick that I always do. And so essentially what I do is I combine yellow mustard with Splenda in it, which makes for like a low calorie sweet mustard tasting sauce that I can use on my salad. So this is a really, really low calorie option or alternative to a dressing. This is something I've used with hundreds of clients. I've been utilizing this trick since 2015, and it's something that saved me hundreds, if not, honestly, at this point, thousands of calories over the years. So the last portion of the meal I'll order is a side of carbs. And for carbs, I'll usually go with a plain baked potato or a sweet potato, as this is a carb source that we can order plain almost anywhere we go. And there also won't be anything added to it. So it makes tracking easy and simple. And also, potatoes are also one of the highest satiety foods. So it'll provide a ton of fullness. It's going to provide you a ton of micronutrients, potassium, fiber. And so it's going to help with hunger management on the diet. And if there is that rare case where potatoes aren't an option on the menu, what I'll usually do is I'll go with a fruit, a piece of fruit or a fruit salad, both of which are filling and they're fairly easy to track. And also they're super low calories. So when it comes down to it, guys, this ordering framework is really designed for you guys to be able to be the most successful as possible when eating out, and so that you could stay on track and you don't have to take every single thing like that I laid out in terms of tips and advice and the framework itself. But even if you just take, say, the water preload, we see a 10% reduction in energy intake from that in and of itself. Or you take the Splenda and the yellow mustard trick that I utilize in every restaurant that I go to, and you save yourself 300-400 calories on a dressing for a salad. These are little things that stack up, and they're simple swaps to really make it so you put yourself in a position to succeed. Jeff, did you have any other tips that you wanted to add, my man?
No, man, I've got like a shish over delivery going on at this point. It's like a wild time that the kid's trying to handle. I'm like, blah, 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 blah. So I appreciate you handling the last little bit.
No worries. So just to round this on out, really when it comes down to it, guys, I'm a big advocate of setting ourselves up for success, especially during a diet, as fat loss can be a challenge in and of itself. But stalling out and not seeing progress when you feel like you're nailing the plan,
hey, Lena,
can often lead to a situation where you're frustrated. You feel like you're failing this process, whereas just increasing your awareness around your meals out and making some simple swaps and adjustments can really save you a lot of frustration, wasted time and effort, and can make it so that you have a more productive fat loss phase. So as always, guys, please be sure to rate and review the show. And we will be back on a weekly basis as always. And I'm going to say, goodbye. I don't know if Jeff's going to be able to, but we're going to end the show right on this one.
All right. Well, you guys have yourself a good one. Share, love, like, support, all that. I'll catch you next week, man.
All right. Peace.
Peace.